Good evening and welcome to the Cedar Falls School District Board of Education meeting on this Monday, January 27th. I call this meeting to order, and we will begin by a public hearing for the 2020 roofing projects. And I have with me in my possession an affidavit of the publication showing that the notice of time and place of hearing for the 2020 roofing projects. This notice was published in the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier on January 15th, 2020. The board will now hold a hearing. So I'd ask if anyone would like to make a comment, they please step up to the microphone. Seeing no one, we will now close this hearing and we will move on to an additional hearing for the North Cedar Playground project. Again, I have in my possession an affidavit of publication showing that the notice of time and place of hearing for the 2020 North Cedar Elementary project, grading project. This notice was published in the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier on January 15th, 2020. The board will now hold a hearing, so I'd ask anybody who is interested in making a comment regarding this to step up to the microphone. Right, seeing none, we will close the hearing for that project as well. So now, moving on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion for approval from someone on the board?
So
I hear from Ms. Hines. I'll first, and we'll give a second to Dr. Heisterkamp. Any comments from anyone on the board? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to public comment. We have received no request for public comment this evening.
We did not.
All right. We also do not have a student representative this evening, so we will move right into Janelle.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I just wanted to mention real quick in front of you tonight, I put some of the most recent Tiger Highlines and then also the Courier special publication that we did for the tours and open houses that we had at North Cedar and Orchard Hill. Figured you maybe would want them for your scrapbooks. So, or if you haven't seen it yet, you can definitely have some reading material. Tonight we're going to start with our communications update with some exciting news from the athletic side. This past weekend, Cedar Falls had 4 wrestlers in the Iowa Girls State Wrestling Tournament, and it was held in Waverly just this past weekend. And for the first time in the history of the tournament and in our school district, we had 2 students that placed. Raylan Strelo finished 6th place, so she was the first Cedar Falls Tiger to ever medal at the Iowa Girls State Wrestling Championship. So big congratulations to her. And then we also had Abby Lyman finished in a 4th place. So congratulations to both of them. This is just the 2nd year that there has been an Iowa Girls State Wrestling Championship tournament. Also wanted to mention we had 7 students that were named finalists in the Iowa State Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division Know Your Constitution contest. Pictured here is Jacob Smothers, Vindati St. Pal, Madeline Castings, Jillian Kellum, and Jillian was actually a finalist for the best essay. Paran Sampat, and then not pictured is Olivia Smothers and Emma Yarrow. There were 100 finalists picked out of 1,000 students that submitted their essays, and 5 are chosen random from that for a trip to DC that they get to take with their teacher. And luckily, Emma Yarrow and her teacher Nina Groot were selected, and they'll travel to DC for the conference in February. I think it's the 2nd time in recent years that we've had students selected for that. So congratulations to them. We have students from the high school and then also homes that are pictured here that were finalists. Just wanted to mention one more time before this Friday, we have our preschool registration going live at noon. Again, we have preschool offered in all of our buildings, but for the registration, you need to get online as soon as possible, and there's information on our website for what you need to have to be able to register. It's just a link that's live, and you go to the link and put your information, and then we have that. Once we get other things figured out, you'll be notified later on if your student is able to get into the preschool. Also wanted to mention this Friday at the high school auditorium is a speech showcase, which is a fundraiser for our speech program. And those on the right there is what they'll be performing. So that's this Friday at the high school. Also just wanted to mention, of course, March 3rd, we have our revenue purpose statement vote. We were notified that Waterloo is actually going to be running their revenue purpose statement vote at the same time. So it's, again, just to basically reapprove what's already been approved, but it's for the extension that the legislature passed last session. There's information on our website. I'll be posting information soon about absentee ballot request forms and the timeline for those. We'll be doing a mailing and some information that we'll be sending out to the community as well, but this is not a tax increase. This is, again, just something that the district is required to do by the state and then by the passage that the legislature did last spring session. Also, there's continual updates on this website where we have new high school information. Tonight's presentation will be posted, as well as tonight's board meeting can be accessed straight from our website, cfschools.org, for any information you'd like to find on that. Also wanted to mention that the Gold Star Teacher Award nominations is open until February 20th, so we encourage anyone is able to nominate a teacher, a parent, students, fellow teachers can nominate others as that, for the Gold Star Teacher Award. So we really encourage everyone to go online and do that. And then it is that time of year where we may be notifying people of weather announcements, changes, delays, and our provider for our messaging system, and with the FCC, they've had some changes, so they've asked us that we, to be able to provide texting to people, they actually have to respond to yes to what our text message is, and then they'll receive the text messages. So if you are already within our system, you should have received one, if not two, messages to reply yes to, and then you'll receive those messages from us. If you don't reply yes to it, through the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, we can no longer continue to send you text messages. So we're really trying to push this out again, and I'm working with our messaging provider to find out how many people haven't responded yet, to reach out to them in other ways to make sure they get that information. But actually anyone can just text the word yes to that 87569 to then be on the list to receive those notifications. And you can stay up to date in lots of different ways. Any questions?
I have a quick question about girls wrestling. I believe, am I correct, that's not a sanctioned sport yet, is that correct?
Not yet, no, but they're working towards it, I know.
From my understanding, there's advantages and disadvantages of having it sanctioned. For instance, you'd be expected, I'm not sure how many weight classes there are, 11, I think, in girls wrestling right now. And that would mean that teams would need to field a full squad, and plus we'd have to have coaches and a Schedule C position for those, that sort of thing. So right now there's an advantage to not having it sanctioned, am I correct?
Yes, I think there's pros and cons both ways. I know their intent is to try to get sanctioned by the unions in the state, Iowa High School Girls Athletic Union, because I think with that then there becomes a little bit more strength behind not only the competitions but the framework for how you run practices, when and how. So I think that's something that they've been working on now for, well, really about 2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
If it's not sanctioned, if it's not sanctioned, do we have any liability exposure from an insurance if it's not an official sport?
No, it's similar to some of our clubs and other activities that we have that students are involved with. It's all underneath our insurance carrier and our umbrella insurance packages.
Rugby.
There are several, right, there are several sports that are being looked at by the Girls Association, but they do have to be sustainable.
Yep.
So I think it will be a while before all this gets finalized. The other thing that's going on tonight, because we have a very, very busy high school tonight, is that there is a Pops concert, choral Pops concert at 8 o'clock that you all are invited to. It's over at Orchard Elementary. So, there you go. Go over there tonight.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we shall move on to a high school planning update. So we have with us this evening Mr. Sanderman from Envision Architecture. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, another update today to kind of bring you guys along on development of planning efforts with the high school. And do I just start clicking, Janelle? And a minute. There it is. Okay. Last time we were here, I'll give maybe just a couple quick slides of what I went through last time. Now we're kind of on to the next phase of the process in schematic design into the strategy portion of it. So In our process here, what we talked about last time was a lot about the discovery, a lot of that listening, understanding the problem. We like to say that. We really like to understand what the issues are before we really dig into it. And then what we've been doing a lot of in the last few months here is really the strategy side of things and getting into solutions and strategies that relate to what we heard. So you guys saw this slide. We're still obviously, as we move from discovery to solutions, dealing with all of these things as well. Our sort of chaos slide, all the folks that you guys know are involved in all the different issues that we need to take into account. So last time I talked a little bit about the meetings we had with teachers, students, community engagement, and that led us to our space program, really developing all the spaces that we want to have in the high school and what they're about and how they act with each other. And we've gone on several tours of other high schools as well to get input and feedback and have some peer-to-peer discussions with folks and see what else is out there. And with that, then that led us to creating design drivers. And these are kind of some of our guiding lights, if you will, as we move into the next phases of creating solutions and developing options in terms of the planning efforts. And some of these things I'll touch on as we get into what you're going to see here. So in schematic design, we've been meeting lots of meetings again. We've got a steering committee meeting, which has a few board members on it. It has our planning team meeting, lots of leadership from the school, as well as our design team members. And we've been meeting with the planning team essentially weekly, discussing different topics throughout the planning efforts. And then the educational leadership team is made up of teachers, a group of teachers from the high school that really gives us broader input and looking at the educational learning aspects that we want to make sure we're considering as we're developing the plans and these solutions. I mentioned last time too, we have several consultants that are on board with this process. So as we go through and talk about theater space, we have a theater consultant. As we're looking at the pool for future development, we're planning that in this schematic design phase. So we get it located, get it sited correctly. We have a consultant helping us with that as well. And a group went on a tour to Dubuque Hempstead. They just opened their new pool there, and a great example of a new high school pool in the state. So that was a good tour to go on. And of course, we've been meeting with individual teachers in their high school departments to really start looking at the spaces they want and start looking at how those adjacencies work and flow together with the whole building in terms of its configuration. So discussion items, you can see there I've kind of talked about a majority of these. That's really what we've been kind of focused on in these meetings. Some things, like I said, in the planning team meetings that we've talked about have gotten into mechanical systems and what we're looking at in terms of the best system to provide us long-term energy efficiency. What is the first cost? What are the kind of long-term life cycle costs of those? So we're doing that analysis with our engineers, also partnering with CFU on that. So that's ongoing and great discussions there. And you guys will hear a little bit more of that as we get into development and future meetings as well. And site planning layouts. As we get into really understanding the building, that it's kind of a back and forth with us with site and building and how they affect each other. And you can see there, kind of on the lower part of the screen, some of our blocks of a building is what that is. And some people got to play with that in some of our meetings in terms of trying to look at big pieces of the building, moving them around, seeing what makes sense on the site, and what are the possibilities and challenges that the site brings. So first, what I want to get into is walking through a few site diagrams and how we're really approaching the site configuration and zoning of the site, if you will. And then I'll get into some of the more specific building diagrams. So this is showing 27th Street, and then really that shape there in the center of this is your site for the new high school. We know we have the UNI neighbor there to the east. Future residential property, right now that's UNI property to the north. and future residential off to the west that's potentially going to be starting anytime in development. So it's good to understand our neighbors and what we have to deal with as we develop the configuration. Also want to think about sight lines into our site from 27th. That's kind of the predominant access that most people will be coming to the site, students, public, et cetera. So as we're thinking about how the building sits on the site, what's located to the front of the site, community access, student access, we want to make sure we're thinking of those primary site areas. The other site is really, if we're on the site, what are the potential views out of the site? And we've talked a lot about, right now there's great views to the north. It's not developed now, and there's sort of that Dry Run Creek area there. So there's some opportunity there to capture some views to the north. Other things we think about when we're looking at the site plan are related to sustainability. This is not just a smile on the picture. That's really showing the sun coming around the south side of our site. So I didn't orient you first. Most of you, I think, kind of know that north is to the top of the site to orient everyone. So that south path of the sun, in terms of sustainability, that's kind of the first big move that we can do to really think about energy efficiency and how the building gets situated on the site. And also helps us with when we think about natural daylighting of the space and controllability. Sun angles from south sun are high, so that they're easier to control than east and west, as well as then north, as most of us know, is diffuse light and easier to control. We don't have to deal with a lot of architectural solutions or things to start shading those types of windows. So a good first move to think about as we're planning this building and orienting it. This red shape here is really indicating a stadium layout on the site, and it's ideal to orient stadiums and competition fields in a north-south direction. So we want to take that into consideration as we're thinking about the site as well. So we start thinking about placing building components on the site and an academic bar and where that might be located, to start taking advantages of that view to the north, we really think is an important thing. Then also wanting to think about access into the site. Our main access points are obviously going to be 27th, but there's potential to that east side, as well as then we know there'll be connections into the residential to the west. As we start thinking about the other components of the building, the large components of music, performing arts, and that gym athletic PE component as well, we think those make some sense in terms of zoning the site to that community entrance off of 27th being a main kind of entry location there. And then overlaying stadium onto that site, relating it to the athletic component of the gym, as well as then you and I with the dome and the fields there. We think that makes some sense. Stadium, there'll also be some practice fields on this site, which so it starts to, we think, really make some sense to zone our site as it relates to you and I there with fields, the athletic stadium piece, gym, and those community areas, and then really pushing the academics to the north part of the site and take advantage of that north area. And then this is overlaying some parking, starting to think about where parking would be then located along the south area of the site, potentially wrapping around to the west as well. Then that leads us to thinking about the building. Like I said, I'm simplifying this a little bit. It's not purely just thinking about the site and how that works and thinking about the building and how that works. There's a little bit of iteration and that process overlapping on itself. So this is a little hard to see on the screen, but these are really the major components of the building. Leadership in orange, auditorium, performing arts in purple, gymnasium, athletic pieces kind of in a green. You'll see them in yellow a little bit as we get further into diagramming. That innovation hub component in pink, and then creative is really what we like to think of as the arts, FCS, those non-traditional core classes, woods and metal, some of those career tech courses as well, and then the academic in green. all those spaces really want some adjacencies to each other. A lot of them want to be tied into each other. And so as we start thinking about that, we look at, again, where's the community coming and how are they engaging in components of the building, and where's those more academic pieces of the building, and start to situate leadership, auditorium, gym in that more community end of that bar, and academics start to grab innovation, the creative components, as well as academics, of course. And we start to think of linking all those with a commons space, some type of space that starts to create some connecting fabric to each of those components. That long linear diagram gets a little difficult to do in a building form, so we start to think there's maybe a better way to start connecting these spaces. Our building's not going to be around, so we think about how these common spaces can interconnect with each other, and we start to think about community to academic on our site. If we go back to some of those site plans with coming from 27th being that community side of the building, and getting kind of levels of community, levels of privacy, different levels of engagement in the building, from more private to public and academic in the back. And we think that makes some sense in terms of zoning the building and how it fits together on the site. Those commons components, then we started to think about one large commons wanting to get broken down a little bit to really serve a more community commons at that front main entrance to the building. Community not only for actual community coming into events, but that student community to come into the building as well and have that place at the beginning of the school, at power hour, at the end of the day, that type of place, as well as serving for that kind of lobby area, performance event area outside of those large spaces like the auditorium and gym. And then moving into where the creative bar is, those other types of classes there, and common spaces, starting to connect those, as well as then more private commons off of that academic zone. That's what you're starting to see at the top of the page here. And then really centering that around the pink innovation hub, trying to create some really unique spaces there that aren't just a learning studio. There's some other types of spaces there for students that let the teachers have other tools for learning and teaching that are available. So this starts to get us into then a real diagram of what we start seeing as a floor plan to the building. So you can see the public kind of main student entrances coming from the south side of the building into that center commons corridor there, and really creating a lobby for auditorium and gymnasium, performing arts area. That athletic area in yellow, performing arts and auditorium, those purple colors on the left side. And then starting to move into the building, pushing leadership up. That's one thing we've done, is split leadership a little bit. We've had several discussions about leadership close to academics. Leadership needs to be close to the front door as well. So this concept right now has a reception component of leadership at the front door there. That's what you kind of see in that bottom orange box. And then leadership also, a larger piece of leadership as well as counseling, pushed back closer to students for that engagement with the students. And then you see another orange box, that's kind of a community meeting room that could also be, its main purpose is classroom space, but it has a wide variety of other uses. It's a larger classroom type space that becomes multi-purpose and can also be used for pre-function space for gym and auditorium. So it's got a great multi-purpose use and a good location there right off the entry. Then as we move back, we get into that blue creative bar that starts to get created there as we move back into the building. And then you see the building starts to get actually split, and we create this academic bar where you're seeing innovation and the academic components. Those learning studios are really located back there. And how we're developing the planning is really thinking about splitting the building. We've looked a lot at natural light and views into the building, and we've got a large building here. And so one way of creating daylight and bringing that in and keeping things still compact in terms of a floor plan was then splitting that academic bar. It is actually a 2-story bar, so those components are stacked there, and we sort of step down and open up to those views to the north with that. So the primary access here is something that's really emphasized in this plan that you can see all the way through to the north, and taking advantage of that daylight, those natural views through that space. The other thing you're seeing here is we obviously want to think about what's going to be happening in the future. So we're planning the pool in the future. You see that to the upper right. Thinking about where that gets located. You can see the stadium icon there as well. And then a future field house or another space that's a multi-purpose space that could be located adjacent to athletics in between the stadium, also close to the creative end of the academic core. So it could have multi-purpose use in that space as well. And then thinking about where we might add on to the building components to that academic bar as well. That might happen to the west, potentially could happen to the north as well, depending on how we do that. So we continue to, as we develop the plan, think about where those future additions and components are, so we move forward with a solid plan there.
Brian, before you go on to that, so as far as our current scope of work of funding that has been generously approved by our community, based on your diagram, is that just the colored areas that you're demonstrating? So the pool is not included at this time, although you're taking considerations about doing that in the future. The field house is not included at this time, although you're taking considerations for that in the future.
Correct.
As well as for future additions. Is the stadium also within the current scope of the funding?
There is stadium, there is components of stadium in the current scope of funding. Yep.
Okay, great.
So we're still, working through exactly what that means in terms of the scope of full stadium and those pieces. Any other, I'm kind of through plans and site plans. Next I was going to get into schedule, but any quick questions on plans or site plans from?
I just have a couple general questions. I know, not getting too much into the weeds because I know this is still conceptual, but we do have students accessing the building from the south into those public spaces, the athletic spaces, and from the west. If you have students who really are coming in and they don't have a lot of activity happening in the auditorium and the gym, are they going to be able to just walk right into the kind of the academic wing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And you mean in terms of a separate entrance?
Correct.
Potentially, yeah. We have also at those, where you see the staff notation, it's maybe hard to see there. There'll be stairways there that potentially would be able to be opened as well.
And then just maybe a question for Andy. I'm not sure who's, we keep talking about that co-curricular learning, that interdisciplinary learning. So I know way ahead of that, but hopefully those conversations are still happening. So as we start to look at what that's going to look like, we have the opportunities to have our staff either teaching in places or located in places where they are doing co-curricular exploration rather than, just maybe staying in their silos of specialty.
Yes, and I think there's been multiple conversations that are kind of ongoing as we go through these iterations, staff, community, multiple different people. And I think what has been a common thread amongst all of them is just an appreciation for, I would say, the responsiveness by Envision with adapting and coming up with different iterations as we go through this, and that's been exciting. But as we've talked about ways that we are creative in nature within these spaces, how do we build innovation as kind of the one of the key cornerstones of this design so we can be innovative in all that we do. I think access, both externally and internally, has been a continued conversation as far as what that looks like and how do we ensure that for not only when it opens, but for 20 to 30 years down the road as we continue to look. And sustainability. Everybody that we have talked with within the groups has said sustainability is extremely important as we look at this to make sure that we're being very good stewards environmentally as well as economically as we look at what's best for this site and this building.
Yep, and to answer you a little bit more, Jen, the way we're developing that academic wing there, you start to see a whole academic piece surrounded by some co-learning spaces in the center. Those spaces are really meant to be those breakout areas like you've developed at Aldridge, that kind of same thing at a different level and scale. And really what we've started to look at as science being integrated into those and start to create that interdisciplinary potential and flexibility. Really, we want this to be flexible and adaptable. So, really you guys as the school and school board can kind of use the building as you see appropriate, and we're not creating a kind of configuration that doesn't allow some flexibility and adaptability. Anything else?
I just wanted to have you point out on here also one of the things that we've been discussing and that has been an important feature, particularly of the academic area, is to have access not only to natural light, but also natural views. And so one of the things that was discussed were the courtyards and the ways in which you're ensuring that the majority of the academic classroom spaces or learning spaces will have access to both of those features. So
Right,
maybe you could
right.
just point that out and to talk about that just for a minute.
Yeah, so as I talked about that academic wing being pulled apart there from the building, that really gave us the chance to create that courtyard, or really was the reason for pulling it apart. And as Sasha was mentioning, there's a lot of research out there that talks about not just natural daylight being important, but really that view to nature. And we all might say, oh, our students shouldn't be necessarily looking outside all the time, but even that respite moment to have a bit of nature to reset the brain has really been shown to be important in educational learning environments. So creating that courtyard space that we're able to actually make it large enough to get some trees in there, to get nature in there, and it actually be view to nature, not just this small courtyard that is really just letting some natural daylight into. So it's kind of an important piece. As we're starting to lay out the plans, that is actually we're looking at daylight too, so we're trying to use that to get daylight into a 2-story space. So as we study that becomes almost an 80-foot separation there between the two buildings. So it's a decent amount of space to get some natural landscaping in there and some components to nature.
And those courtyard spaces will be able to be utilized also by students in kind of free
Yes.
time, but also as outdoor classroom spaces
Right.
as well, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So then to kind of just end on schedule of where we're at and where we're going, what we're looking at is mid-February, we're kind of wrapping up schematic design phase, and we'll be coming to you end of February and really show you that. There's been a lot happening kind of here in the last month and month going on, and we'll be really developing exterior and interior imagery of what the building's going to look like and really show you a more finished floor plan. So that'll be really exciting to show you that in February. And at that point, we'll be then having Story Construction, the construction manager for the project, pricing this schematic design plan and set to really let us have a benchmark and look at where we think we're at in terms of aligning with budget. So that's one of the great things with you guys deciding to go ahead and engage in a construction manager, to have them engaged in this process really lets us look at checkpoints of pricing along the way, and they're involved in the majority of our meetings as well as we're talking about this, to kind of keep us in line and keep us thinking about where we need to be in terms of budget as we move forward. So you can kind of see from the highlighted circle there, this is kind of where we're at in schematic design. Then our next phase will really be getting into design development in the next several months of this year. And that development will begin more detailed involvement with the high school departments, where we really get into their spaces and talk to them about finishes and casework and storage and kind of all the detailed stuff. So that's kind of our next step in the process. And you can see then the next set of schedule moving forward there. Any questions on big picture schedule?
So obviously, at this point, you're doing a lot of effort into getting feedback from a lot of different stakeholders in this process, and what you've designed so far is still somewhat conceptual as far as how the things are laid out. At what point do you think, as far as on your timeline, that you'll have so that we can go to our community and say, look, this is what the school that you approved, this is kind of what the look and feel of when you drive down 27th Street, some kind of conceptual, more drawing that people can actually, visualize a lot easier. When do you think something like that will probably be available in the process?
That's really what we're going to be showing you on that February 24th board meeting update.
Excellent.
So a lot kind of happening here along the process in these next few months. So.
Any other questions?
And for those of us that don't know anything about construction, 3 years to build a building, is that typical?
Yeah, so that shows about 3 years. We're potentially in the kind of 30-month, 32-month phase, and that's pretty typical for high schools of this size that have recently been being built.
Right.
Yep. That's kind of what we're seeing.
One of the things that helped us, had helped me at least, when we went through and kind of talked deeply about the timelines, was the fact that this is really about 4 times or 4 of the Aldrich Elementary buildings that we're constructing here. It's just the amount of construction that is occurring, the amount of dollars that will be expended within these 30 months, and the size and scope of the project is enormous. It's immense. And I think once you start seeing a little bit more detail within, the courtyard spaces that Sasha pointed out, that they're 80 foot wide, but on that they look like they're, an eighth of an inch wide. And then you start factoring that with the total size and scope of the building. It's a really substantial project.
Yep, it is. Yeah. That's a great comparison when you start thinking about your a single elementary building versus an entirely new high school. Definitely a change in scope.
No, this is Nate here. I'm not sure if this is the point in the process where this would be something to consider, but I just kind of make the point that sometimes, we want to be responsible with the community's funds that they graciously gave us to construct this, but sometimes just reminder that quality isn't, or that the cheapest option isn't always the most quality option in the long run. So I just wanted to throw that out, when we were speccing out and pricing systems construction and building, and,
Yep.
just to make sure that we're not, not always going with the bottom line, just bottom line cheapest bids.
Yeah,
to make sure that, cutting corners at the beginning may cost us a lot later on, and, 10, 15 years down the road after the building's constructed, so.
Yep, those will be discussions we'll be having when we get more into those pricing discussions of the life cycle cost. When I say that, that really means looking at not only just energy in terms of what payback is if you're going to spend a little more for this type of mechanical system, but also, to your point, if I'm gonna buy a window, if I'm gonna buy an XYZ, making sure we talk about the longevity of those first cost versus your maintenance cost, because that's something to think about with definitely with the school district.
Yeah,
is
and
those
materials
long-term-
and in workman quality and things like that.
Yep.
Excellent.
And just one more reminder, we do have those great CAP students, so if we can find ways to involve our different CAP strands, whatever that looks like in this process as we move forward, would be fantastic.
It's a great idea.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in the update. We look forward to the February, sorry. I would look forward to September as well, but look forward to the February presentation of being able to visualize it and show that to our community. That'll be excellent. Thank you very much, and great questions, everyone. Thank you. Moving now to the 2018-2019 school year audit. Every year, as you'll see in our monthly, every month when we present financial results, they're always placed on file for future audit, and so they do eventually get audited. And this next segment of our agenda is to review the audit which was conducted. So I'll turn it over.
I'm on a different side of the table this time. So this evening, I'd like to introduce Mana Hag. She is with Carney Alexander, a partner with Carney Alexander, as well as our lead auditor for the district. Tonight, we will be reviewing the 80-plus page booklet that you have in front of you. Obviously, we will not be going page for page. This is a summary this evening, so Monica and I will be tag teaming a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started, and feel free to ask questions as we move along, or we can certainly answer those questions afterwards as well. So if we can pull up the PowerPoint this evening, would be fantastic. Okay.
I just want to say, first of all, these financial statements are yours, and I know I've told you this before. What we do is, it's our responsibility to come in and to express an opinion on these financial statements based on generally accepted accounting principles. Our responsibility is also to express those opinions under generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards, because you are a government. And so our opinions, they're included in there, and they say that we present, that the financial statements are presented fairly. They are unmodified, and we believe the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And that's really the main thing about the financial statements.
I don't know if this is we've ever said this, but the process that you utilize, I think, is something I've not really experienced in other districts, and it's really an in-depth look at the financials. You do a pre-audit. Typically, you'll come in for like 4 days sometime during the summer to go through a lot of the documentation, and then come back for another 3 to 4 to 5 days to go through the actual in-depth audit review.
Right. When we do the pre-audit, then we can go through the transactions that have gone on throughout the year. When we come back in August for the audit, then we're looking at your year-end balances and all those, and the documentation that we need, and the disclosures that we need to make in the financial statements, et cetera.
We just appreciate the time that you invest into the district to really take a deep dive, so we appreciate that.
Okay, up on the screen, you'll see the revenues for fiscal 19, and this is for all funds. And this is just a breakdown of where those revenues actually come from. And you'll see that the property tax for fiscal 19, and a reminder for fiscal 19 would be July 1st of 2018 through June 30th of 2019, so it's always in arrears. For the property tax, we had 36.68%, and for sales tax, about 6.95%. And you'll see the other revenues across the board there. But the majority, obviously, is that property tax. In comparison to fiscal 18, it's up within about 0.1%, so it's very comparable to fiscal 18. Moving on with the historical revenue for all of our funds. Again, this is just a different way to look at it. This is dollars versus percentages. And again, you will see that property tax for fiscal 19 was approximately a little over $27 million for fiscal 19. For our expenditures this year, for fiscal 19, this is any expenditure throughout the district. So this would be our general fund, capital projects, operations, maintenance, however that may be. You will see that our expenditures are almost 62% for instructional. Should be 62% or more based on our expenditures, as we're a school district. It should be instructional. So for every penny or every dollar, 62 cents goes into instructional.
And just for a clarification, I mean, we often at this board talk about how our revenue and our expenses, they come in silos and they're different buckets.
Yep.
But as you're looking at this data, this is cutting all the way across this. This is looking at expenditures regardless of which bucket it fell in. And when you're looking at revenue, it's regardless of which category it came into the school district, correct?
That is correct. The general fund is self-supported, and then we have multiple different funds that are in silos, as you had indicated. So this is all expenditures across the district for all funds that show that we're at 62% for our instruction.
Gotcha.
And everything ties together, obviously, in the school district. So non-instructional programs, counseling, support, transportation services.
Yep.
You add all those together, it's much more.
More. Mhm.
Now, looking at your expenditures, though, for example, you don't have in there you've got facilities acquisition, but as far as do we have major construction? Is this, sorry for using is it OPEX, not CAPEX? And CAPEX is is categorized elsewhere for expenditures?
This would include capital expenditures.
Capital expenditures as well? Okay.
These are governmental funds. Governmental funds, capital expenditures are an expense. It's only on the entity-wide when we show that, and we'll get to that a little bit later, that we actually, when we show them as capital assets.
Okay, so we're not, so sorry, take it out, on these expenditures, we're not differentiating between operating expenses and capital expenditures. This is expenditures regardless of how, from an accounting standpoint, we later categorize it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, thank
Can I ask one more quick question? In the instruction category, does that also include benefits?
It would,
For
yes,
the-
it would include all of our salary and benefits in regards to our instruction. That would be correct.
Thank you.
Okay, as we move on, the historical, this is a 3-year, again, just a comparison for our expenditures. And you'll see again that instruction obviously is our largest expenditure throughout the district. For fiscal 19, it was approximately about $44 million. But this is just a good comparison in regards to where those dollars fall based on those particular expenditures. So as we get into the condensed statement of net position, this is for all governmental funds again. So this is our total assets, and this would be a 3-year comparison. And as you can see for our total assets, it did increase again this year for fiscal 19 at $165 million. It'd be less our total liabilities, which is as we complete our projects, as we complete different things, those items would come off, therefore the $88 million. And then the less net deferred inflows and outflows, which is about approximately $20 million. You'll see our net assets at $56,603,820, which is an increase of approximately about $4 million, which is a good thing. It means that our district is on good standing financial status. We're improving our net assets, and we continue to grow. So as we open our buildings and as we continue, you'll see that even in fiscal 20, I expect that to grow because we had remodeling of Orchard Hill as well as North Cedar, and we will begin to show that on our books as well. So as we continue with the high school and things like that too. This is just a bar graph in regards to this previous slide I just showed you. It just shows it a little bit differently. It shows how as we continue to grow and where we sit at that particular time. Again, we're on good footing. It's a good thing to have in regards to the increase with our net assets. So as we look at our condensed balance sheet, this is for all of our major funds. This would be our general fund, our debt service, our capital projects, and then any of our non-major funds. And you'll see the end of the year, we ended the balance at $53,612,215. This is mainly due to the fact of the completion of Aldrich Elementary, but it did, and that was because of the decrease from fiscal 18. So. Absolutely.
I was just going to mention, when she's going back and forth between the condensed, 2 slides before where it was the condensed statement of net position, that is the entity-wide. That's why you can see that there's the assets, and that includes your fixed assets, your buildings, that type of thing. The total liabilities, that includes your bonds payable. When she comes over to this condensed balance sheet, governmental funds, that's the governmental funds. That's where your assets are. You can see what they are. They don't include the fixed assets. The liabilities don't include the bonds payable and that type of thing. So you can see the difference. For years, you only reported on the governmental fund basis, and it's only been in the last probably 10 years that you started having to report on the entity-wide. So it goes back and forth, but you just have to make sure that what you're looking at is what you're trying to find. Does that make sense?
Sorry. No, that's fantastic. So as we continue, as Monica had indicated, the statement of net position, and this is for our proprietary funds, and that's a mouthful, sorry. That's in regards to our nutrition and our district coffee shops. You'll see that this particular fund did end with $482,609, which was a decrease from fiscal 18 of approximately about $49,000 from previous year.
Do we have an idea of why that is? Like I saw that when I looked earlier and I just was...
Yeah, Unfortunately, I don't without looking at it a little bit closer. I know that we had increase in students, obviously increase in cost regarding in order to feed those children, we had 110 new children within our certified enrollment, but I don't have a specific reason in regards to why that decrease, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Part of that too, when I was just telling you about on the governmental funds, you have the statement of net position and then you have the governmental balance sheets. On the proprietary funds, they're under a different type of accounting, so they report the same. So on there, as you can see that they have the capital assets, you have the liabilities, and in there, which we'll talk about a little bit later, they have the pension for those employees that work on that. So there are more liabilities that really have they depend on the number of employees that you have in the nutrition area and that type of thing. So an increase in that can increase the expenditures and the liabilities with that.
Okay. Good, thank you.
So as we continue to move on, the governmental capital assets, again, this is a 3-year comparison. I want to point out a couple different lines for you. One is line B, it's the construction in progress. Obviously, the district has been very busy over the past few years in regards to construction of Aldrich Elementary, the remodel of North Cedar and Orchard Hill. That shows a 74% change in over the 3 years. As well as then the building line E, which indicates $122,120,000, an increase of 19% over 3 years. That is the opening of Aldrich Elementary, so that's the increase of that particular building. And then for total capital assets is $112,115,000, which is a 3-year percent change of 29.53%.
Our construction in progress at the end of, on 12/31/19, we have $17 million worth of construction in progress still?
June 30th?
Oh, I'm sorry,
It
yes.
was
June
the
30th.
2 in process?
Yes.
Oh.
The North Cedar and Orchard Hill are
They
still
were
in
very
process.
close.
Okay.
Correct.
And so do we use a principle of we wait till the project is complete and then we move it over in bulk, or do we do it as a percentage?
Bulk.
Bulk, okay.
It goes into the building when it's in use, and then it starts to be depreciated.
Gotcha. And so at this point, really that balance is virtually zero, I would imagine, or very low, right? That 17 million, most of that, because we've now completed Orchard Hill and North Cedar. I mean, I know I'm speaking about the next fiscal year beyond 19, but
Yep, you will see that 17 million dwindle very lowly.
Yep.
And that's because of the completion of Orchard Hill and North Cedar, that's correct.
yep.
Yep. Okay, this is again then the business and the district total capital assets. This is for our nutrition and our coffee shop throughout the district. You'll see then that is a 3-year comparison. We are down a little bit, but a total net capital assets for the district again of $112,233,000 or 29.49%. You will see in fiscal 20 this increase again, and that's because of the completion of Orchard Hill and North Cedar as well. So the net capital assets will increase again. It's projected to. As we move on to our debt, this is a good snapshot of our district debt, and you'll see the general obligations listed for fiscal 17, 18, and 19, the 3-year comparison. As well as then, which obviously our community was graciously provided the opportunity to utilize these general obligation bonds for Aldrich Elementary as well as North Cedar and Orchard Hill. You'll also see the revenue bonds, 2011, 13, and 16, as for a total bonds of $46,387,000. As we move down, then you'll see that there is no longer a note payable. As a reminder, that note payable, that $310,000 was the completion of the purchase of the UNI property for the high school. Our final payment was made in fiscal 18, so we will not have a note payable going forward in that particular section. And then we continue to move down in regards to our compensated absences, our net OPEB liability, and move forward. And I know Monica has a couple comments in regards to our liabilities on that case. So.
Much love, OPEB and pension liability. The OPEB liability is you offer a plan for insurance for your employees, and that is, they give us a present value of what they think you're going to owe over the life of those employees and even in their retirement, if they so stay, because the state of Iowa requires that you offer their insurance until they hit Medicare. So this is not something that's sitting on your balance sheet and it says, okay, next week we're going to pay 10,000 of that or 20,000 of that. That's a liability that sits there. Every governmental entity in the state of Iowa has it based on the number of employees, the age of their employees, when they think their lifetime of their employees until they hit 65, the number of retirees they might be paying. And even though you have, excuse me, you have retirees and they're paying their way, their age and, I can't think of the word I'm trying to say. I'm not an actuary. Their age and their usage of healthcare determines what rate is applied to your entity. So it's a lot of information that comes from the insurance and the actuarials, and they say, based on all of this information, this is your liability at June 30th. And it's basically nothing is done with this until next June 30th. Now, there's a good 4 or 5 pages for your enjoyment of reading if you want to see all those actuarial calculations and where they come from and that type of thing. The other thing is the pension plan. Again, that's IPERS. IPERS pays the pension. But this is a calculation based on your employees, their lifetime, their mandatory years, and we get all of that information, virtually all that information, from the IPERS report that the state of Iowa, state auditors audit, and then give us that information, make this calculation. Again, nothing is going to be paid. It's not sitting on your balance sheet and all of a sudden you owe that money. It's a liability only if IPERS disappears. And if IPERS disappears, this liability is on every government entity in the state of Iowa. All of the school districts, all of the cities, all of the counties, all of any type of state entity. So it's here, it's on your statement in that position, but it's on every school district in the state of Iowa. What they wanted to do was make it so supposedly every school district is comparable.
Does this level of debt cause you any concern as an auditor for the financial stability of the Cedar Falls School District?
No. There's a 5% limitation that you aren't to go over, and you're not near that.
And for the accountants in the room, I mean, it basically is projected liability over the lifetime of these employees, correct?
Correct.
So it's nothing, yes, it's no debt that we are carrying right now, because I know when we were looking at making big decisions, we did have some community members come and use this as a reason to maybe create concern about the district's financial well-being, but I think it is important that we are very clear that this is not a current debt load, but rather a projection of what we would owe over the lifetime of our employees for their benefits and.
Correct. It's a requirement for the state of Iowa that you have this on your state of Iowa report.
And the caveat I would add to Jenny's statement would be that is the liability we would owe in a worst-case scenario where the entire system crumbles.
Correct. And it changes every year based on the age and of your employees. And if employees leave, then it's also obviously changes on that. And, the younger your employees start to become, then the farther out it goes. So, that all is in the, like I said, I'm not a actuarial, thankfully. It's worse than an accountant.
So just a question on the table. So you've got a table of due within 1 year. Is that, are the amounts in that column inclusive in the balance as of 6/30/2019, or are there that column, I should add up those two columns in order to come to this?
No. The balance at the end of the year,
It's a subset.
correct.
Okay,
correct.
okay.
Of that total balance, this much is due next year.
Okay, so then if I look at the bottom row of numbers on here, as far as, so we went from a total indebtedness, if you will, including this pension liability that is a bit fictitious, from 85 million to about 81 million. So we as a school district reduced, we paid off debt of about $4 million in the course of that fiscal year ending on 6/30/19.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
As we move forward, I just wanted to throw this slide in there. You've probably seen this in different presentations that I have had. It's in regards to the sales tax, and it's the debt service coverage ratio. It is a requirement that we have coverage of a minimum required debt coverage of 1.20. You can see in all of the fiscal years in which we've been well above that 1.20. It is a requirement. We ensure that it does put the district in a positive position, that we're able to make our debt obligation payments. You will note that the estimate for fiscal 20 did decrease, and the reason for that is because we recently sold sales tax revenue bonds in November, and that will impact the fiscal 20, so that will change that debt service coverage ratio, but we are still well above that 1.20 minimum requirement. And then before I hand it over to Monica, component units. A component unit is defined as any entity created for the sole purpose of benefiting the school district. Therefore, the Cedar Falls Foundation, we are required to have that within our audit. And you'll see that the net position for fiscal, beginning July of 2018 was $2.6 million. The ending net position for end of June for 2019 was 2.8, with approximately about $200,000 increase. So, is there any questions before I hand it over to Monica as we move forward? Okay.
Okay, part of I mentioned earlier, we do this audit and do most audits under generally accepted auditing standards. For governments, we have to follow governmental auditing standards. For entities that receive at least $750,000 in federal money, which means either from the federal government direct or through the state of Iowa, through the Iowa Department of Ed or the Iowa Department of Ag, which is most of your federal money. And it is over the $750,000, so we used to have to do, it was called an A133 audit. Now they changed and it's under the uniform guidance. So part of that requirement is that we do these summary of independent auditors' results. What that says is we gave you an unmodified opinion on the financial statements prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The audit did not disclose any significant deficiencies in internal controls, did not disclose any deficiencies in or non-compliance that were material to the financial statements. Then it goes into the major programs, did not disclose any significant deficiencies in internal control over the major programs, and an unmodified opinion was issued on compliance with the requirements for the major program. We do a calculation every year to determine what major program or programs that we will look at. And this year the calculation, we did the Title I grants. And without going into a lot of detail, you have Type A programs and Type B programs, and you look at all these. And the threshold is $750,000, and that's where we picked the Title I grants. And Cedar Falls Schools did qualify as a low-risk auditee, and that means we can do a certain amount of looking at those major programs based on our experience in the past 2 years, whether you had any non-compliance or any significant deficiencies, which you did not, which is why you were in low-risk auditee. Excuse me. Then you have the Part 2 and Part 3 are the findings related to the financial statements. Excuse me. And the financial findings with federal awards, of which there were none. Then we have the statutory reporting, which is at the end of the financial statements. It's also on these slides. Your expenditures for the year did not exceed the certified budget that you amended. There were no expenditures that did not meet the requirements of public purpose. There were no expenditures for travel expenses of spouses. No business transactions were noted that were not appropriate. Excuse me, no transactions requiring board approval which had not been approved were noted. No variances in the basic enrollment data were noted. No variances in supplementary weighting were noted. Your investment policy, you didn't have any non-compliance, instances of non-compliance in your investment policy. The certified annual report was filed timely. Categorical funding was used to supplement or supplant rather than supplement, and there were no instances of non-compliance with the statewide sales and services fund. We appreciate the staff that works and gathers a lot of information for us, and we appreciate the opportunity.
As do we. Like Andy had indicated, it is a two-step process for us each year. Monica and her team have been fantastic with us, not only during the audit, but as throughout the year, as we definitely lean on their expertise for several things throughout the year with questions that we may have, as well as then the staff too. They do a phenomenal job ensuring that we are accurate and appropriate and making sure that all of our entries are made in a timely manner based on the requirements. And then a special thanks to Carrie and Pam and Jill, as those are additional entities that we have to work with and extra information that we certainly have to locate. So it's a huge team effort, but it's a fantastic one that we're very proud of this audit, and thank Monica and her team very much. So, any other questions that you may have?
This is a great comparison over time. Do we have any, would this help us compare ourselves to other cohort schools?
Everyone, I mean, they're all doing the same.
Right.
I mean, if you want to look at their liabilities, their debt on there, they're going to all have the OPEB and the pension, that type of thing. All the schools are under government accounting, so.
And we will take a look at the next presentation here shortly, the district financials. That does give us a comparison to many of the districts across the state.
Okay.
So, yes, we utilize a lot of this information to compare and to see where we are financially to ensure that we're compliant.
Excellent.
Yep.
Quick question, are we required to have a printed document by Iowa code or something like that, or is that just the
No, that is
generosity?
something that we provide.
Okay.
You certainly can provide those back to us. It's just for your convenience. There are that we do have to file accordingly, but you personally know, we can definitely.
Okay, well, I would say that having extra printed materials isn't really too sustainable, so,
No.
yeah, so I would
Yes.
say not necessary.
We have decreased that over the years. There are some entities within the state as well as locally that have requested printed copies that that would be our insurance. You and I usually request those, so we do provide those as needed, so.
Thanks.
Yep.
However, if someone wants a copy of this, I assume it would be placed on our website?
It is,
and they
yep.
can-
It will be placed tomorrow on our website after tonight, so.
All right.
Yep.
I don't know, for Andy or Danielle, those liabilities that we were talking about earlier, do those play any impact or have any influence on our insurance with the district as we leverage the costs or any type of?
No.
No, those are uniform across the state. So again, they're not a true liability, but they're just kind of on the book liability.
Right,
So
right.
there's not anything that impact insurance rates or insurance levels.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Along a similar vein, would these have any impact on our bond ratings?
Well, good question. When we went to the two bond rating companies 3 or 4 years ago in Chicago. That's something that we present and talk about. Iowa's unique as a state because it was something that not all states require. So it is something that it takes us some time to be able to talk through that. Most know now, when you go to Moody's, they understand because they do enough ratings of Iowa school districts to be able to understand that background. But this isn't uniform across the country. It just is something that we have to make sure that they're aware of. Is that a correct statement? Yes, okay.
Right, yeah, this is just Iowa, the IPERS obviously, and is in Iowa. But other states may have something comparable, but.
And what's really tremendous is IPERS is one of the strongest pension liability programs in the nation and certainly continues to grow, and that's exciting.
I noticed they put out a publication here recently that stated they beat their assumptions by a considerable margin, right?
They did, which is really good.
Excellent. Any other questions? Great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
One
Monica.
foot out the door. No.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Yes, Danelle.
Yeah.
Sure.
Janelle?
So
Absolutely.
appreciate the work you do to keep us on track and in budget. That's
Thank you.
really awesome.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And since we enjoy hearing from Janelle so very much.
We do need a motion to approve the audit.
Oh, I'm sorry. We
Nope,
need a
that's
motion to
okay.
approve. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I move to accept the 2018-2019 school year audit as presented.
Thank you. Mr. Gruber, is there a second? Second, Ms. Hines. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Now, moving on to the district financial report.
Yes, you'll have to listen to me, unfortunately, for a little bit longer. This one is a tad bit longer. I want to give you a little bit of background before we get into the details of this, but it actually is a report that I provided in October, the CAR, the Certified Annual Report. It's a review of that. So to get started, where do we begin is really the legal basis, and it's home rule versus Dillon's rule. For the governing body, the authority to take action only if the specifically stated in law. That applies to all Iowa public schools, as well as the AEAs and the community colleges. In comparison to the home rule, which applies to cities and counties. In 2017, there was a passage of House File 573 that provided a little bit of wiggle room in regards to home rule versus Dillon's rule, but it did not grant the district's full home rule status.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I haven't perceived very much wiggle room.
No.
So,
There's not, no. It's very minor, if any, to be honest with you.
Okay.
We obviously still need to continue as Dillon's rule, but no, there is very minimal,
I was going to say, I
Yeah.
think wiggle, I
Yeah.
haven't
Yep.
perceived, okay.
yes. As we move forward, the board has seen this particular screen. This is just our fund accounting and our requirements, the governmental fund, as well as then our proprietary funds, and then our fiduciary funds. And it's broke down into silos. I like to show it as silos because in Iowa community, you can't mix beans and corn, right? So in this particular thing, you really can't mix these funds either. There's specific purposes for this, and the general fund would be that particular. We will be reviewing the majority of all of these, some greater than others, but we will be reviewing this evening. So the goals and principles of the Iowa School Foundation formula, really, I like to take a look at the right side. It is pupil-driven. It provides a local discretion for incentives, establishes maximum spending control, and this formula is same for all public K-12 schools and AEAs. The other items there as well fall in the goals and the principles, but the ones that we really take a look at is the right side. So this evening, there are 4 key factors for the Iowa Public School Foundation formula, and those 4 key factors are the enrollment, equalization, supplemental state aid, or you might hear it as SSA, and then balance, and we'll actually go through each one of these here as we proceed. So enrollment determines the majority of our funding received by the school district, and it's based on the count performed on October 1st. As you can see, this is a good example of 75% of our total general fund resources comes from our certified enrollment. So that October 1st count is very important, and over the past few years, we've obviously increased. This year, we had an enrollment increase of approximately 133 students, if I recall correctly. Then we have equalization. That's the second one in regards to the 4 key factors. This is where the legislature established a law that cost per student across the state will be nearly equal to ensure every student equal access to the quality of education. For fiscal 20, the state cost per pupil was $6,880. The maximum was $7,045. You will see of the 327 school districts, 150 of them currently are above the $6,880 that indicates nearly equal, and there's 177 that receive that $6,880. Now, the legislature did pass last year the ability to equalize this formula, but it is in $5 increments. So if you figure $165 in $5 increments, it's going to take quite a few years for us to equal that $7,045. So. The next key factor is the supplemental state aid, as I had indicated. The legislature and governor, they control that annual increase and per the students. The basic formula is the cost of per pupil times the percentage times that October 1st enrollment. On the screen, you'll see a few examples of if the supplemental state aid was set at 0%, 1%, or 2%, how that would increase or decrease or stay the same based on our enrollment for the year. And then the state funding formula sets the expenditure ceiling for each school district, total spending authority, and tells the school district how to fund its spending authority. So what is the spending authority? Spending authority is similar to a maximum limit on a credit card. It's a good way to look at it. The maximum limit does not necessarily mean that you have the cash to spend to that limit. You have the availability of it, but you don't have the cash in your books. The spending authority is a calculation, and it does not generate its own cash. And then any unused spending authority carries forward. So each year, if you don't utilize that spending authority, it's not a use it or lose it type of situation each year. You do get to carry that forward. This is just a calculation of that spending authority and just shows that very general breakdown of how that calculation is determined for unspent authorized budget balance. And then this is a worksheet that shows our unspent authority authorized budget worksheet. You can see it's a little difficult to see on the screen, but due to the opening of Aldrich Elementary and those expected expenses, we did utilize approximately about $300,000. It did go down from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19, approximately $300,000. And then the last key factor would be the balance, and that's the ratio of property tax and state aid supporting the district's budget. All districts across the state, we have a uniform levy of $5.40 per 1,000 assessed valuation. That is a requirement that all school districts are required to levy. And then you have the state foundation percentage, and unfortunately that's an incorrect number. That should be 87.5% level, as well as then the supplemental state aid covers property tax increase. And then you have your additional levies, and that varies from district to district, and that's based on the assessed valuation within your district as well. So for fiscal 19, we're kind of playing in multiple years here. Fiscal 19, our cost per pupil was $6,738. You'll see that of that, 62% was that state aid formula, and then 25% was that uniform levy that I had just discussed regarding the $5.40, which then leaves that 12.82% for the additional levy for the combined district cost that the board has ultimate control in deciding on those. So, as I had mentioned earlier, it's silos. We take a look at different particular funds, and within those funds, we do have some restricted funds, and those restricted funds are our student activity management, capital projects, debt service, and nutrition. We will discuss those here shortly, but we will continue with our general fund here shortly. So really the purpose of this presentation this evening is to provide information on the general fund key financial indicators, individual fund revenue and expenditures, and then individual fund balances as of fiscal 19. So the Iowa Association of School Boards has developed some key financial indicators that provides us a quick snapshot of the district's financial health as well as other districts across the state. So we're able to utilize them and provide this information based on these key requirements. And those 5 requirements or key financial indicators are certified enrollment, our financial solvency ratio, the unspent balance budget authority, and then the annual unspent budget authority ratio, and then the salaries and benefits to total our budget ratio. And we'll go through each one of those here shortly. So enrollment history, this is one of the first key indicators, and you'll see on this particular screen our enrollment has continued to grow, which has been very positive for our district. You'll see our certified enrollment, the numbers there for October of 2019 have increased, and that again I believe was 133 students. This also includes our open enrollment that's in the red, and then there's a very minimal tuition in, which I don't even think you can probably see on this particular screen, but that is dependent upon year to year regarding those particular enrollments. It's hard to see that one. The next screen is the certified enrollment comparability. I wanted to show this in regards to the top 5 and the lower 5 based on Cedar Falls schools. This is our comparability. October 1st of 2010 to October 1st of 2019, our student enrollment increased of 616 students, or a 12.9% for Cedar Falls schools. So the next screen shows our enrollment projections, and we work with RSP and associate projections, and this was updated last January 2019. And you'll see that we follow these projections pretty closely. The red is the projected line by RSP and associates, and the actual is in the gray line. You'll see we are within 5% of those particular projections. But as you can see, as we continue to grow, we do continue to review these to ensure our projections are accurate as we grow.
And I assume that when we did these projections, so if I remember correctly, we updated them in January 2019, so from October 19 going forward, those would have been the updated projections?
Correct.
And anything prior to the October 19th would have been projections that were developed in previous studies?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. As we continue then, we're moving on forward with our general fund balances, and you have seen this screen before. This shows our total assets and our fund balance, and our total assets is our cash and receivables and our inventory, which was $11.12 million. And then our fund balance is less our payables, our assets less our payables is a $4.3 million. You'll note that there was a decrease in the cash on hand of approximately a little over $1 million, as well as our fund balance. And that was anticipated due to the fact of opening of Aldrich Elementary with the needs for that particular building, the supplies, the possible increase of enrollment as well with instruction needs. So that was anticipated. We will definitely have to have discussions in the future in regards to cash reserves to ensure that decrease does not continue, but also to increase our cash on hand in order to pay, our invoices and our bills on a monthly basis. So.
What do you expect that would be the timing that we would be required to consider a cash reserve on our current trend?
No, we will be having those discussions here shortly as budget continues, and we'll be certifying our budget here in April. So we'll be having those discussions in the next coming months.
And there are several different cash reserve levies that are done. We've, talked a little bit about some of the approval to be able to apply to SBRC for some of those cash and spending authorities, be it enrollment growth or special education costs, things like that. So this is just would be a levy focused solely on generating the cash based on the authority that we have so we can replenish, because the funding's 1 year in arrears. So we're spending and serving 133 students based on last year's funding model. Mm-hmm. And that will take place in March and then in April as we certify the budget.
The discussions will take place in March? Okay.
Yep. As we continue to move forward, this is our revenues and expenditures and our history. This does include our instructional support. You will see that the revenues for fiscal 19 were $59.2 million, as our expenditures had increased to $60 million. And again, that increase was anticipated, and that again is due to the opening of a brand new building of Aldrich Elementary. So our expenditures did increase by 1.6 compared to fiscal 17 and 18. Go ahead. And
recall, we're always 1 year in arrears.
Yep.
So, when you serve 133 new students, take that times the $6,880 cost per student, we're always expending more dollars than what we have, even though we have the authority to be able to generate the cash reserves to make up for that the following year.
This breaks down the ISL, it's the instructional support levy, and again, this is our revenue expenditures. It changes from year to year, as just a reminder to the board that our building principals do have the discretion for this particular use. These funds do carry over from year to year, so they anticipate different expenditures that they may have. So you will see an increase in expenditures based on the needs of the buildings and their anticipation of those needs. So you will see an increase from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19. That was the majority of those increases were Aldrich Elementary, though, with the equipment, books, supplies, different things like that for that particular building. So this shows the history of our general fund revenue and the breakdown of that in dollars. In regards to the local property tax, you'll see that that is at $21 million. Then we have our local other, which is in the red. It's $3.65 million, and that is basically our rentals, open enrollment, our textbook fees, and then you'll also see then the state contributes $32 million, and then we have our federal, which is $2 million, which is our title program. So our our federally funded programs. This just gives you a different look at it. It's in regards to percentages and how those fall. Again, 35% for property tax, but the state is the 54.68%. Finally, getting to key number 2, sorry. Key number 2 would be our financial solvency ratio, and this is a snapshot of the past 5 years. The district did decrease, and mainly that is because of the discussion we just had regarding cash on hand. The solvency ratio is based on our cash. It's the assigned and unassigned fund balances, less the general fund revenues and less the AEA, and it measures the district's fund equity position. ISB recommends 5%. We are above that 5%, but we definitely want to have those discussions and continue to watch this to ensure we have those cash on hand and review those cash reserves.
Danelle, what would reverse this trend?
Well, increase in supplemental state aid would definitely increase the cash on hand and having that on-time funding rather than in arrears. We always have this funding in arrears. We're definitely educating those students. We have an increase of 110 students or 133 students. We're educating those students. We're paying those invoices and those expenses out at the time, but we're getting that funding in arrears, so our cash is not always on hand at that time. So,
And at what point do alarm bells start going off?
Well, I'm going to go back a couple steps too with your question just previously. There's not many people that were on the board when we made this decision that are on the board right now, but in 2015-16, we made the decision because of the amount of cash reserve that might have been necessary. We split that up over 2 years to say we won't ask for the full amount of cash reserve that might be necessary, knowing that this would slide down, but knowing that we would try to recoup those over 2 years. We've had now 2 of the last 3 years higher than anticipated enrollment growth, which is a good thing. So that has caused us to expend a little bit more cash because we're 1 year in arrears. Danelle did a great job answering that question. The other answer is cash reserve, and we need to come back to our cash reserve levies to look at the amount of cash that needs to be generated through that authorization when we have that discussion in March, so we can have higher financial solvency ratio back into the cash on hand.
Our district has always had a goal of 10%. With that discussion, ISB obviously has that recommendation of 5%, so we definitely want to see that continue to grow and increase as we move forward.
That 5% is the minimum that they would expect.
That is correct. Yep.
Given that it's based on certified enrollment from the previous year, what would you, this may be kind of out of this, but what would you anticipate an on-time funding model looking like based off of what, since we're on a per pupil basis? You know, if that's something we're talking to legislators and lobbying, like what, is there any ideas of what might be a ideal funding model based on, especially since we're per pupil basis at this point?
Boy, the true model, and again, there are several different groups that looked at this about 2 years ago to look at what that could look like for a funding model that's uniform, consistent, and on time. Really, it's moving away from certified enrollment to served enrollment, because what gets messy is when you start trying to calculate those that are tuitioned in versus open enrolled in versus open enrolled out. We actually get the funding for students that are served in other districts that are open enrolled out, then we actually have to write a check to those districts. It just gets really messy, and that's what causes the lag really in the funding from the state in this case, because of some of those different minutia of accounting that we have to do to ensure that that funding happens. If it just was a snapshot in time, here's the number of students you're serving, here's the dollar amount associated with those students, that could be done much more on time.
Is that going to be based on something going into a school year at that point? And is there a possibility, if that model, that we'd be owing back to the state, given, like, given a snapshot type thing? Those things will come up when discussions of a new funding model, so.
Yeah, and it depends on when, so this gets really into the weeds, it depends on when your fiscal year starts and ends. So the state says we want to continue with the enrollment as a snapshot on October 1st, your fiscal year could actually start in December, and that's when the actual then on-time payments could begin, or January 1st, excuse me. So that it's just a different mindset and a different model that could be a little bit more fluid and actually meet the needs of districts instead of always being 1 year in arrears.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, as we talk about a cash levy, because of the system, if we determine that we need to do a cash levy, that in other words is increasing property taxes in order to improve this ratio.
It is part of the levy, and we definitely would have that discussion. I can't indicate if it will increase it, but it is part of that levy. Yes.
Okay. And then we've all, I guess, coming back to, I guess Sasha, I think, had an excellent question about, well, what can we do to reverse this? And so you listed, is one of those items also, we've talked about the fact that there's a funding mechanism that we were capped, 15 years ago or whatever, but that's related to special education, right?
That's related to at-risk programming, and since that is really, it's a categorical, it's not necessarily fit underneath this, so it's not,
It wouldn't help this.
No.
It'd help us in general, but it's not going to help this ratio specifically.
No, because it caps us at our expenditures as well as our revenues, so it's really something that's a cap that doesn't allow us to do the programming that we would think that we would want to do, need to do for our students.
Yep.
Okay. As we continue, then, the history of the unspent budget authority, and this is our key indicator number 3. You will see on the screen that, again, the district did decline approximately $300,000. That is much less than the previous year, which was a little over $800,000. So we have studied off a little bit. Again, this was anticipation of, increased enrollment in those particular needs and educating those students on as on-time funding. So So then we have the history of the unspent budget authority ratio. This just shows a percentage in total expenditures. You'll see there has been a gradual decline over the past 3 years, where we currently sit at 10.4%. We have a district goal of 10%, so we want to ensure that we continue to monitor this and meet our goal of our 10%, and that's a district goal. And this is another way to look at it. This is the budget authority ratio. This is by authority perspective. We have overspent by 0.5%, but that is down compared to fiscal 18, which was 1.45%. And it measures the annual amount of UAB as a percentage of expenditures each year.
And again, we're growing, so that's always in arrears, and that's the challenge. It's always hard to say that we overspent because it's not necessarily overspending, it's because we are serving more students than what we are budgeted for based on the state funding formula. So we always have 1 year of stopgap where we're serving over 100 students more than what we are funded for.
And as we move on, the net fund balance as percentage of unspent authority. This measures the percent of the district's ability to finance its unspent budget authority. This is down, and again, this is tied to our solvency ratio. So again, we had less cash on hand, having those discussions in regards to cash reserves to ensure that our cash increases will make a change in this particular screen. Then we have the general fund net days cash ratio. This is a universal ratio within the business world, which is the amount of cash to get through a particular period. So we generally like to see 90 days as desired. Obviously, we did not have 90 days in fiscal 19. We had approximately 62 days, which in theory, our cash would have ended as of September 1st. But again, we want to ensure that we increase our cash and increase the number of days that are available for this particular, go ahead.
And this will be corrected by cash reserve levies as well.
Correct. Yep.
Just to point out, that graph was a little bit deceiving, right? Because it started at 60
60,
rather
yeah.
than, yes, thank you. Yes.
So I would agree with you on that. Thank you for pointing that out, Jeff. So then we have our net fund balance as percentage of expenditures. Again, the measures the percent of district's cash available to cover non-fund months, and our goal is 10%. For fiscal 19, it was approximately 7%. And then we finally get to the fifth key indicator, and that would be the salaries and benefits for our total expenditure ratio. We like to see between 80 and 83%. We are a tad over 83%. Not much, 83.3%, but it did decrease from fiscal 18 about 0.5%.
So this is now going back to the audit slides.
Yep.
Where it showed that 62% goes to instructional. It's really, when you add all the different components in to serve students, 83.3% is really total expenditures for salary and benefits to serve students within our district. And obviously, there's some for utility costs, transportation costs, different insurance rates and costs that go above that extra 16.7%.
Just a kind of a question or something to note, maybe. I think that the SSA is based on consumer price index. Is that correct?
So,
What do they use to
no, not
calculate?
necessarily. Some of it's based on the Revenue Estimating Conference and the group that meets in the state really quarterly to try to anticipate what the revenues will be coming into the state for their funding purposes. And I think what they have done recently is try to look at, based on the overall revenues for the state, what makes sense if we split this out based on the overall budget at the legislative level. And the recommendation for the governor this year was 2.5% SSA increase, which comes out to a little over, I think, $100 million towards districts, and that is based on the overall revenue anticipated by the Revenue Estimating Conference.
Okay. Okay, I was just thinking that the CPI, I don't know why I was thinking that, but given that the majority of our expenses are not accurately measured by that, that they are salaries and benefits, which is a very different thing, that might lead to an inaccuracy.
Yes, so I believe the UEN sent out some information today that talked about the CPI, but the CPI growth increase over the last, and again, I'm going to estimate right now because I don't have that in front of me. They're saying like the Consumer Price Index has grown over the last 10 years 20%, say. The district funding formula, the SSA amount, has increased by 12%. So there's a lag in what it's costing us to do the day-to-day business of running buses and heating and cooling our buildings and all those other components, trying to keep up with inflationary cost of insurance, that the CPI is far outgaining the amount of dollars that are generated for school districts and allow us to keep on par with what's happening.
Great, thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
Okay, so the history of the assessed valuation, this is one of the big things any school district is assessed valuation and how it impacts the tax rate. On the screen, you'll see the history of that, and that gap continues to shrink. You'll see that the basic valuation increased of 3.73% from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19, overall past 10 years of 53%, and then with the TIF is 2.41% for fiscal 18 to 19, or 40%. Just to remind the board that the basic valuations determine the general fund and management levy, and then you add in the TIF for the debt service and the ISL.
Can you explain that again, just for, so what's the impact of a TIF district as far as what, can you, on our funding?
Well, it's just the last two. So it's the ISL and the debt service is included in the TIF, but it's not included in the basic. So we don't generate some of the dollars for our say, physical plant and equipment levy. It's just the TIF difference just impacts the debt service and ISL.
So if there's a TIF district, for example, there's a downtown Cedar Falls TIF district,
Yep.
right? So that TIF district does not generate funds for PEPL?
No, it does not. It's the basic.
Okay, in our, for example, our industrial park, which is in a TIF district, so those, is there a sunset on that? Does it eventually come out of that program, and at some point then it would contribute to PEPL?
So my knowledge of TIFs, because we have no control over TIFs, nor do we dictate how TIFs are handled, is not really limited. But my understanding is when a TIF occurs, they are using the TIF, the tax incremental financing, to pay for the infrastructure to be able to have that development occur. So typically those TIF timeframes are set, and I don't think by code you can go over like 20 years, I believe, for a TIF district, and it might be 10 years. I just don't know that offhand. But what happens then when that sunsets, the full valuation of that property that's been invested in goes onto the tax rolls, and that's, I think, why we're seeing such a good increase within our community, because our forefathers, our city leaders use those TIF districts very in a mindful way so they can target the growth. So there's, when those come back onto the tax rolls completely and the TIF ends, we have something that's valued at $100 million, $50 million because of that short-term TIF. So we might have a short-term gap, but a long-term benefit based on what's happening within that TIF.
So, sorry, one other clarification. So the PEPL doesn't apply during that period of the TIF. How about, for example, I mean, our community passed a bond for the high school. Is the TIF, are properties within the TIF going to contribute towards that?
Yep, so debt service and ISL are the two that count towards the TIFs.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So as we move forward, this is our general fund combined district cost, and again, this is just a different way to look at that property tax and state aid history. You'll see for fiscal 19, it was 62% for state aid, and then property tax for the 37.92%. So this is a financial dashboard of all the school districts across the state of Iowa. There's 327 school districts in the state of Iowa. I like to take a look at this, but the next screen actually is the one that we really want to take a look at, and that's comparable to the 25 largest districts across the state. This includes all 327, so there is a wide variety of districts across the state. But in taking a look at this real quick, you'll notice that we currently rank 16th largest in this in certified enrollment for fiscal October 1st, 2018. Our solvency ratio for all 327 obviously is below the state average, and in fiscal 19, 6.58%. Our UBA, and one of the things in regards to the solvency ratio I want to notate is there is a particular district with 114%, which, to put things in perspective, they would not need to levy any funds for the next year. And my guess is that is a rather small district that is listed there. I am not familiar with that particular district, but we do have one district within the state, obviously, at 114%. So. Then we have our UBA, which is our unspent balance per pupil, currently ranked 287th out of the 327. Again, this is all 327 districts within the state. Our UBA did decrease for fiscal 19, approximately $100. And then we have our valuations per pupil. We currently, for fiscal 20, is $394,000. And then our general fund tax rate, we sit below in regards to that third. We are currently below, or we are at $10.81 for our general fund tax rate. And then for our total tax rate, again, we are below or are halfway, less than half, in regards to $13.84. So of those 327, we're currently ranked 147th. So, as I had mentioned, this is really the one we want to take a look at in the snapshot of where we sit as a district compared to those 25 largest schools. And this is a better comparison, and to be honest with you, looking at it, all items considered except our solvency ratio, which obviously we've mentioned, and that's concerns in regards to our cash reserves, we sit very favorably across the district with those 25 largest school districts. Gives a good overview.
And I think it's important. Doug always did a great job with this, as well as Danelle now, to be able to say, kind of stage setting, that knowing where our solvency ratio is at when we have the discussions regarding cash reserve levies coming up in March, we just need to remember that slide.
Okay, as we move forward, this is just an overview of the past 5 years in regards to our general fund tax rate. It's just a different way to look at it. You'll see that Cedar Falls is in the red, the 25 largest districts in the state of Iowa, and then the state average. We obviously are below that 25 largest average, and we are just slightly above the state average in regards to our general fund tax rate for fiscal 20 was $10.81. So then our total tax rate is the total in regards to, again, Cedar Falls, the 25 largest, and the state average. Again, you'll notate that Cedar Falls is well below the 25 largest school districts and slightly above the state average, which for fiscal 20 was $13.84. So then we have our net assessed value per student, and this again is in comparison to the 25 largest schools, and you'll see that Cedar Falls is very favorable with that. It's $394,000 compared to the 25 largest schools. We are obviously below that state average of well over $430,000. But again, that includes all 327 school districts. And then as we move forward, Andy had given a little bit of stole my thunder in regards to what the governor had proposed. No, I'm just kidding. In regards to the history of the supplemental state aid, this just provides an overview of what we have seen in regards to supplemental state aid compared to the district as we continue to grow, where we fall within that category. You'll see we did have 1 year, 2018-19, where it was at 1%, and those are the funds in which we received. Fiscal 19, or excuse me, 19 and 20. The governor proposed, I believe, last year 2.25, ended at 2.06. With our increased enrollment and different things, variables, we were just under 4% in regards to allowable state supplemental aid. Where we sit going forward, I'm not sure. The governor actually proposed 2.5, as Andy indicated. Obviously, there are other areas and other requests for 3.95, close to 4%. But I very conservatively look at 0 until that final number comes out, because we definitely don't know what that will be. But with a 0%, you will see that ours will be about a 2.5% increase if it was at supplemental state aid of 0 this particular year. And that's because of our increased enrollment.
Right.
Mhm. So, moving on from general fund and moving into our restricted funds, we'll go through these rather quickly. The general fund is obviously the larger fund that we discuss. But again, I like to look at these as silos. You don't like to mix corn and beans, as I have indicated. But you can't use these particular funds to fund the general fund. They're only for these particular purposes. So part of that is our management fund, and this is a restricted fund, as I had indicated. This is board controlled. It's used for our property and liability insurances, our district insurances, to include any unemployment payments or property loss, and early severances packages, which we don't actually use within this particular district. You'll see that the management fund has stayed rather flat. It did decrease a little bit, but that was an increase in premiums, as well as then also the opening of Aldrich Elementary. We had a new building within our premiums and our liabilities, so that was an addition to that particular management fund. This will decrease expectations for fiscal 20 as we are utilizing some of that fund balance. So at this time next year, when I'm presenting, you will see a decrease in that fund balance because we are utilizing those particular funds. Quick to review the SAVE, that is also known as the 1 cent sales tax. Again, that's restricted. It's utilized for construction and remodeling and repairs, for purchases, as well as then throughout our districts in regards to emergency repairs. And then it's also the payment and principles of interest for our general obligation bonds. Boy, that's a slow transition. This is a overview, and it's pretty difficult to see. I apologize. There's a lot of information on this particular slide, but it's from the beginning of our SAVE, our 1 cent sales tax from 2000, and you'll see where our beginning balance was, where those revenues have gradually increased throughout the years, where those expenditures that we've utilized, and then where our funding balance is at the end of 2019. As a reminder, there is a difference between end-of-year balance and net available, and that's because we have a bond reserve of $995,000. So our available net for fiscal 19 would be the $5,731,000.
So I'm looking at the column for sales tax revenue, and within the last year, the Supreme Court kind of changed the rules as far as the sales tax nexus. Which gave states the ability to claw back a lot more of cross-border sales. Have you, and maybe this is a brand new topic, my expectation is that it would increase sales tax revenue for the state because of the fact that you can claw some of that back from internet sales and that type of thing, that companies that weren't previously reporting to the state of Iowa sales that occurred in the state of Iowa. If it's a brand new subject, that's okay. Just my expectation would be that that sales tax revenue will increase.
Yes.
I would agree.
And just so everybody's aware, we always budget conservatively, and some of that is requirements by the state, but also just to make sure that we are always going to be in a position where we have extra authority and extra dollars on hand. When we set the budget and we looked at the new high school with a general obligation bond of $69.9 million and utilizing $43 million of 1 cent sales tax, the expectation when we looked at that was to say, when we did this last year, what is the current enrollment? What is the current dollar amount allocated per student for the SAVE? You take those together and you anticipate that's going to be your revenue for the next 40 years, 30 years. We do know that the sales tax in a previous slide Danelle showed has gone up, $40 to $50 per student. We anticipate that going up, I wouldn't say significantly, but certainly in a way that's going to be noticeable, that we're going to be able to have more revenue than what we anticipated or budgeted for.
If that's the case, would we expect to pay off bonds a little bit earlier?
A lot of different options. I think the answer to that would be yes, to save interest and just dollars out that can be utilized in different ways. And as we get those dollars in, it just makes sense to be able to pay off some of those liabilities, but then also if there are different needs that come up that we can use those dollars for.
Okay.
Okay, as we continue, this is just a snapshot of where we have been over the last 5 years and where our fund balance is, where our available unrestricted fund balance is, and you will note that there was a significant decrease, but as a reminder to the board, this was due to the fact that we had determined the usage of this fund balance for the Aldrich, North Cedar, and Orchard Hill Elementary. So as, again, reminder, we have $5.73 million in our available fund balance because of that $995,000 is restricted. This just gives an overview of where the fund, the SAVE funds have been expended and over the past years. You'll see the majority, actually all of our buildings have been impacted one way or another with our SAVE dollars. You will see an increase in Orchard Hill and North Cedar, again this coming year based on the completion of our projects, but you'll see that little sliver for the new high school as well. That will begin to increase as well. But we have distributed those dollars at some time or another over those years in regards to construction and remodeling of our facilities with these particular dollars that we have. So outstanding revenue bond debt. This is just an overview of currently the two series as of fiscal 19. The series 2013, that $9.95 million, which was at an interest rate of 2.375, and then the series 2016 of the $15.5 million refinance at 2.1%. The 2013 bonds are callable now. We will definitely be having discussions and take a look at this as we continue to finance the high school and how that may come into play with financing and those needs regarding the minimum debt coverage of the 1.2%. So this may, those may be paid here shortly, as well as then the Series 2006 bond is callable beginning of December 31st, 2021. This slide will change again for fiscal 20. As a reminder, again, we had sales tax revenue bonds for a series 2019 for $10 million, and that was for the infrastructure of the high school and the beginning expenses with that. So this will change a little bit based on those particular slides. And I believe the $10 million was at 1.899%, so significantly lower than our other two that we had. So moving forward is our PEPL, our physical plant and equipment levy. Again, this is restricted. This cannot support the general fund expenditures. This is board controlled as well as voter approved. These particular items are very similar of usage for our SAVE. It's the purchase and improvement of grounds and the construction. It also allows for equipment purchases over $500 and then also any purchases for school buses and our vehicles. And Andy did a great job in regards to reviewing our 10-year PEPL plan in December. That's where these particular items would fall in regards to that. You'll notate that the PEPL was pretty flat again for fiscal 19. We had total assets of $4.1 million, as well as then fund balance of 3.99. Pretty flat from 18-19. But we continue to review those requirements and those needs throughout the district and utilize these funds as those projects become available. So our debt service levy, we're getting closer to the end here. So debt service levy, just how it works, it's proceeds are generally deposited into our capital projects you've seen on a monthly basis, Fund 31, and that's to be used for the cost of the approved project. Then those revenues from those debt service, which is Fund 40, again, we report on a monthly basis, is deposited into the debt service and used to retire that principal and interest on the bond. So this is a restricted fund as well. This just gives a quick overview of our total assets and fund balance. I have to say fiscal 18 is probably an anomaly. We like to have that as a zero each year. In fiscal 18, that was due to the fact that there were funds available that were transferred from our save into our debt service that carried over for the payment in 18-19. 18-19 is specifically interest that carried over. So we definitely did not have $330,000 in interest that particular year. So the main carryover for this is our interest payment, or interest that we receive. Okay. And then as we move forward, this would be our outstanding general obligation bond debt. And just want to remind the board that this was based on a 20-year bond. It was structured as that, but it's to be paid off in 19 years. As a reminder, this was, again, the community graciously approved this bond in regards to the construction of Aldrich, North Cedar remodel, and Orchard Hill remodel. And Series 2017, $32 million at 3%. Now, this will change in the future. As a reminder, again, the community so graciously passed the new high school for the $69.9 million. We have not bonded that, obviously, for this particular fiscal year, but it will continue to change as we move forward with our project. So this slide will change again. And then we move to the activity fund. Again, that's a restricted, that is student-related. It's for student-related co-curricular and extracurricular activities. It includes any admissions, student activity fees, any student dues. That's how that particular fund is funded. You'll see a quick overview of that particular fund. You'll see that the total assets did increase. It was $566,000 for a total fund balance of $541,000, and those are for student activities across the district. And then finally, we have our nutrition fund, and the nutrition fund is considered the enterprise fund. It is its own separate entity, and the funds for each fee is charged to an external users for goods and services. Again, it is a restricted fund, and it is its own fund. You'll see here that the fund balance stayed pretty flat. It was like I had indicated earlier, it was about $49,000 difference in regards to previous years. This slide does show including pension, as we are required to show that had included and began in about 14-15, and then our available fund balances, $483,000. In summary, so as of June 30th, 2019, our district financial conditions, our cash balance did decrease from June of 30th, 2018. Our net cash ratio was slightly down from 70 days to 62 days. Our unspent budget authority decreased about $326,000. Our ratio was 10.91% for fiscal 19. That is expected to decrease again in fiscal 20. Really need to look at the increases in enrollment without increases in supplemental state aid. That does have a huge impact and puts a lot of pressure on our general fund based on the recommendations and what that supplemental state aid is. And we want to continue the requirements and changes in enrollment, and curriculum may necessitate additional staff. So we want to continue to look at that as we increase. Are there sections or different things in which we have to ensure to continue the fantastic education here at Cedar Falls Schools? So also in summary, real quick, our special education, the district continues to meet those needs of our students. The Medicaid funding was reduced It does reduce our special education expenses. For fiscal 19, we had receipts of $976,000. Just a reminder, that was a decrease from the previous year of approximately $115,000, which does impact our special ed, so it does offset that. Our deficit for fiscal 19 is $691,000, and our projected deficit for fiscal 20 is about $835,000. And that, as a reminder, that deficit of $691,000 is cash that we are expending that we do not receive until fiscal 22. So for those particular funds. Is that a right statement?
Yes, and everybody on the board knows this. This is more for a kind of a community statement. The federal government and the state government knows that the funding formula for serving students with special needs does not meet the needs of serving those students at the level that is needed. So there is an expectation that most districts will have a special ed deficit because of the dollars that we receive are going to be less than what it takes to serve the students appropriately and adequately. So this is something, when we talk special ed deficit, it kind of flows off our tongue because we know it's going to occur and know it's going to happen. But when you talk about a deficit, sometimes our community doesn't always fully understand the funding process and the fact that those weightings have not been adjusted for, I believe, close to 20 years. So it's still an kind of outdated, outmoded funding formula to certainly serve students that might have some special needs.
And that deficit is covered through local property taxes.
Yep, this is one of those tax levies that go for a categorical framework, not for a general fund levy.
Okay. As we close up, we really must continue to closely monitor the budget and the funding changes in order to make those decisions and to maintain a positive learning environment and then positive fiscal conditions. But I really want to just take a moment to thank, obviously, the board and administration. We obviously work very diligently to ensure those dollars are spent accordingly and serve those students that are in need, to ensure that fantastic opportunity here at Cedar Falls as a district. So, as well as then the business office staff, they definitely do the day-to-day and make my job much easier, so I have to thank them as well. So with that, is there anything else?
Could I back up a couple of slides you had mentioned, Danelle?
Sure.
I'm trying to find the spot. In the summary, continued requirements and changes in enrollment and curriculum may necessitate additional staff. So we've had, am I correct that we've had a couple of mandates here? For instance, teaching financial literacy, a push for computer science courses, those sorts of things. Has the state come up with the funding to help us accomplish that, or has that been mostly on the schools to do that?
Yes, those were unfunded mandates, so there have been more and more of those. That's something I think as we lobby and advocate that if there are changes, which are really good changes, I don't think anybody would say financial literacy and teaching financial literacy is something bad. It's something we should do and need to do. However, as a mandate to be a requirement that is occurring in our district typically means districts have to decide at the expense of what if there's no funding, and that becomes a challenge. As we continue to increase enrollment, there's changes that need to be made to make sure that we have good ratios and class size balancing. But then the curriculum components that continue to be enhanced and many times without funding is a challenge. State assessments that really, I believe, doubled in cost with no additional funding that is at the burden of the district. So it's just those unfunded changes in mandates that are direct burdens to local districts sometimes are challenging.
And not only financially, I think they also put a challenge on our students, right? They have to, that's one more subject that they have to pick up at the expense of some other, hopefully elective, but even so, that puts pressure on elective.
I would say students, staff, just because then it's one more area of curriculum that somebody needs to be able to become an expert in, an expertise in with different curriculum and curriculum components. So it just creates some stress on the system, socially, emotionally, financially, in multiple different ways.
Spatially, I mean, we actually have to have physical room in order to teach those courses.
We do, that's correct.
Do they offer any flexibility in those kind of mandates as far as like online training for financial literacy? I mean, there are, I'm thinking about just in general for people, there's some great resources for that. If they mandate that and they don't provide the funding, do we have the flexibility to say, well, here's an online course that you can take?
Well, that's a great question, and it depends on the unfunded mandate specifically. So the actual, there are some groups that are working on the financial literacy where maybe that can be done embedded in courses as you do curriculum crosswalks where students get some of those essential learnings at, but also some online components, so there's some flexibility. But there are some unfunded mandates that have no flexibility, that this is a you shall, you will, and this is how you need to do it. So it depends on the unfunded mandate.
Could I also point out that we depend greatly on the AEAs to help us implement some of these, and at the same time, we're drastically cutting the funding for the AEAs. And I'm not sure that our legislature always understands how important those facilities are to our school district.
Oh, it's a partnership, and it's such a strong partnership that we couldn't do the work that we do for students without that partnership in place. Correct.
How has the changes in the way the state delivers Medicaid affected, you mentioned how much of a component the Medicaid funding is for special education services. How much have the changes at the state level in terms of that delivery affected our ability to?
No. Well, we've obviously seen a decrease, and it's all dependent on federal funds available. So Jill White and her team do a phenomenal job in regards to funding that and providing those funds to the district and ensuring that we file those particular funds. But in a direct district change, we did see a decrease for last year, so.
Okay.
Yep.
But we are the provider that does all the billing for that and the services for that, so we don't have some of the statewide challenges where there might be a provider that does not get funding, because we bill that back based on the services we provide directly to the federal government.
Okay, that wasn't, we're not having to go through that where we're dealing with a different provider. That's what those who are individuals that are more on the are being served by Medicaid are having to deal with.
Yes.
We are more of a provider in some sense.
We are, so
Okay.
we're kind of a direct provider of services, so we are the ones that bill back directly to, we use, a firm that works with all districts in the state of Iowa to help provide those services.
Okay, thanks.
Great questions. Anything else?
I would reiterate kind of what Sasha said before, thanks to Danelle, her team. Obviously, there's a lot of work and a lot of detail that goes into this, and they take a great deal of pride, first being very accurate, second being very high and pride themselves on integrity and doing the right things for our district, for our kids, for our staff, and it's very much appreciated. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please convey our thanks to your
Will
entire
do.
staff.
Thank
Yep,
you.
Thank you. Wonderful. And all of that will be placed on file for audit
Yep.
review? Yes.
Until next time, right?
Until next time. Very good. Moving on to superintendent's report.
Yes, legislative updates. I'm going to re-steal Danelle's thunder. The governor did recommend 2.5% SSA growth. We are going to go down tomorrow with some of us to the Day on the Hill and advocate to our legislators about the importance of funding and multiple other things, so that'll be an exciting day. February 24th, the information report, we'll have our teacher librarians specifically. I think I have to go back and double check, but I think it's going to be our elementary teacher librarians to come and talk about some of the program changes and enhancements that they've made when they serve students at the elementary level. So that's going to be very exciting too.
Excellent. Very good. Any questions for Andy?
Comment, I'm not sure if it's a comment or question. We have census rolling around here, and that does impact some of our spending at the schools. For instance, Title I, correct?
Yep.
ESL, is that funded by federal money or somewhat?
Somewhat.
But do we have any plans in place to talk to, we have a lot of young parents who are going to be doing their census for the first time, and a lot of first-generation immigrant families, that this might be very helpful if we had an accurate count and help our community.
We have a distinguished representative on the Blackhawk County Census Committee across the county, and Janelle Darst is on that. So yes, we are working with them on how we're going to continue to kind of get information out, make sure that everybody's counted for the census. It is important, something that we need to be a partner with and a partner in.
Thank you, Janelle.
Excellent.
Andy, school calendars on here? Are we going to talk about that at another time?
We will. It was on the original one when we started, when we
And
talked.
it's off.
And
Okay,
so,
thank you.
And that was due to, as we've kind of flushed this through some of our system approaches, to be able to have some more dialogue and discussion.
Okay,
So
good.
it's one of those things where we just need a little bit more time to get some more input.
Perfect, thank you.
Calendar is one of those avenues where you can, it's a topic where people are very passionate about, but also have lots of opinions on a school calendar, so.
Indeed.
Very good. Any final comments, questions, concerns from board members?
I have something I'd like to bring up to the attention of the board. Let's see, what day was this? So earlier this year, there was a article that was published in a fairly new news organization in the state, and the overall tone of the overall subject of the article was increased costs for accessing public records for those. And in this article, unfortunately, the Cedar Falls School District was mentioned as an example of where the cost might have been questionable. And it was an news outfit doing investigative reporting on a recent event at the schools. And I just wanted to bring that up. According to the story, the total cost of accessing these documents was just a hair under $3,000. And it's really a one-sided account. So I wanted to bring it up to the board, one, to let them know that this is out there and we're mentioned in it. And then two, I wanted to give the district an opportunity to get at least our side out there and explain just maybe a little bit, as much as you can, and as we feel able to explain what happened here.
Yeah, and this was prior to you being on the board, and each of the board members actually were requested to submit text messages from their phones and private phones. So this, in this particular instance, there was a request for large amount of documents over a large amount of time frame and a time span, with some student information, with some student personal emails and contacts, as well as school-wide emails and text messages, that we gave an estimate based on what we assumed it would cost. Had our attorney review those, because again, there's a lot of FERPA requirements and FERPA expectations when it comes to these dialogue. And our approach always has been cost associated with an opens record request goes directly and becomes a burden for the person requesting that, not for our local taxpayers. And I think that's so important to note, that as we have these, sometimes it's a two-page document, takes 2 minutes to review. Sometimes it's an extensive search for thousands and thousands, close to 14,000 documents that we just don't have the time to review and don't have the expertise, knowledge of law to be able to review. So some of those costs, according to some people, are excessive because we need to have our attorney review those for the right purposes and what can be released.
I just wanted to give us an opportunity to get that out there with this story out here, and I hadn't seen anything before, so.
Yep.
And I do think we also need to be careful about what we are attributing as a news organization and an investigative news organization as well. I don't know that the organization you're referring to has any credentials in terms of journalistic credibility. So I think that's important to be aware of as well.
Good.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
We are going to move into a work session, so I would recommend maybe taking a 5-minute break. It would conclude our telecasting of the meeting, but there is no further actionable items. It's just a discussion about Iowa Association of School Boards and some of the different components with us being involved with that organization.
Very good. All right, is there a move?
It's just, we would go,
Oh.
it's just if we are okay taking a 5-minute break and.
Okay, so we don't adjourn? Okay, all right, so we will conclude our meeting for this evening. Thank you for joining us for our regular meeting.